Welcome to The Tipping Point. The show is titled The Community of Kinship.
The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But nobody, especially faithful people, nobody really wants to wait for too long, especially con los brazos cruzados and tapping your feet and staring at your watches. You want to make something happen, so that's what I want to talk about for the brief moments I have with you this evening. That we're all invited to imagine and create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Mother Teresa's diagnosis of the world's ills, I think, was quite correct when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine together a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? And to that end, what we're all called to do is to stand at the very edges of the margins of that circle and hope that because we're standing there, it will widen. And we stand with specific people out there on the margins, the poor, the powerless, the voiceless. We stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied. When you're really fortunate and blessed and lucky, you get to stand occasionally with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I don't believe this is my call. I think this is our call. It's a human call. I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would be celebrating it.
What a fitting goal for 2022, that we refer to the current state and not the future state, where we have mastered justice instead of striving for it. It's a big goal, but we have no chance of realizing it if we don't set it big. Among the number of things that I am blessed with this year, 2021, was a brief conversation that I had with one of my students where something happened, and for the life of me, I can't even remember what the situation was, but it was something that had happened right prior to that call. And so as it usually is, at least for me, and in my opinion should be, in developing relationships, developing a rapport, being able to talk about things that perhaps might leave you vulnerable, but then coming to the conclusion that we as human beings do not have a choice. I mentioned to the student about my anger and, to a certain degree, the frustration tied to the anger, because anger just takes energy and doesn't replenish it. So the student of mine, without planning it, left a very strong mark Otherwise, I wouldn't tell you the story today. And she went ahead and said, the reason why you're angry is because it's not fair. And of course, she was right. But that got me thinking. That got me thinking about a number of situations where I found myself to be angry. And I attempted to establish causality. I am angry. It's based on injustice. And there was not always a clear causality to be found, but more often than not, Father Greg, in that of what he mentioned, that of what I played in the beginning of the show, talks about the marginalized, the individuals within our society that are on the edges. Those people that we do not see, those people who are not part of our day-to-day routine, or if indeed they are part of our day-to-day routine, we have come up with mechanisms to blunt them out. And he talked about the ability to stand with those individuals who find themselves on the edge. And come up with those elements that we have in common, those things as human beings that should drive us to each other. But because of the difficulties tied to all of those things that seem to get in the way, those similarities or those commonalities, they get pushed to the side. So this show is all going to comprise this concept of the community of kinship that refers to those things by nature simply because we are human beings that have to be a source of attraction. They need to be a trigger for all of us if we allow ourselves to be. To find that commonality so that we can collectively move in the direction that I've stated as my goal for 2022. Making justice the current state and not the future state. Here's a piece that I found in a book that I either am currently reading or I finished. I can't remember which one. I think I am growing up at last was for me the most memorable line in a filmed interview with an 82-year-old Extinction Rebellion protester in Britain, explaining why he had become one of the oldest XR activists during the group's first round of protests in 2019. He encouraged other elders to wake up and take action. Now, of course, the 82-year-old Extinction Rebellion activist was most likely on the edges of society himself or herself. And in fact, by remaining on the sidelines for such a long time, and very possibly for great stretches of this person's life, there was a certain affinity that was established that was recognizable in that of what the youth protest movement was trying to achieve. Such a story can only be viewed as success or, worst case, notoriety. But we have plenty of examples within our society that might not necessarily be so glamorous, might not necessarily be so noteworthy, or as they say within TED, ideas worth spreading. Does that make them any less important? Does that make them any less achievable? Does it make them, for us as individuals, any less worth striving for? These steps that we can follow, need to follow, are usually very simple once we are able to remove the fear that we have of putting ourselves in a situation where we do not necessarily know how we're going to act. How often have you been in a situation where something takes place, obviously it was not planned, and after the fact, you are surprised about your own behavior, something that you didn't expect, something that perhaps you weren't necessarily happy about. And something that you dwell upon for a long time. And perhaps that might be unique for me, but I tend not to think so. Usually what happens is I find myself in a situation where perhaps I've never played those tapes in my mind, either where maybe cognitive dissonance strikes, or it's just a situation that I've never been in before. And there is a certain reaction that immediately takes place, one that I could have never planned, something that obviously is quite innate. And sometimes very shocking. Shocking in the respect that we acted in a way that we wish we wouldn't have. But that would be way too simple. That would mean that we are talking about regret. Here I'm talking about a reaction that we didn't even know was in us. And I wonder if indeed the fear of finding out something about ourselves based upon that situation might be the biggest inhibitor that we have. So going back to this idea of reaching out to those individuals who are to be found on the edges of our society, knowing full well that they have stories that not only do we don't know them, but those stories are so far removed from that of anything that we were ever confronted with. This last Christmas Eve, a few days ago, was maybe not an example to that extreme that I just referred to. But it was an example for me, again, us being a product of our environment, a product of our culture, a product of our current mindset. There was a conversation taking place, and as is very often the case, especially when you have families together in different generations that are perhaps representing different viewpoints, very much involved in those individuals here and now. Some comments were made where it would have been easy enough to say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. Or, I'm not going to go down that road. But of course, that is too easy of a solution. So I have tried somewhat timidly, or some would argue anything but timid. It's partly based on perception to a certain degree. not trying to correct the individuals, but allowing for an extension of the conversation, not to be confined to certain catchphrases to be found on placards in the center of town. But to explain things from a different perspective. And of course, there's always a danger, especially in the situation after so many years, that any comments, especially if they're seen to be interpreted as veiled threats, although that is clearly not the intention. You say something because you care, but they're taken as threats regardless. So instead of falling into those patterns, I decided to not take the bait, ignore the comment, and keep on going. And then that acted as an impetus to somebody else at the table. And all of a sudden, I see 3 generations having a conversation that is based upon perspectives, based upon conviction, based on purpose, where a consensus was being built. And we have been conditioned to think constantly that, well, certainly that won't make any difference to the individual. But life is full of surprises. And often you will find the next time a situation comes up where perhaps maybe that subject is raised, that the nuances in the way that the conversation is conducted, the words that are used, the meaning that's portrayed, the point to be made, takes on a different flavor. Yeah, it takes on a different flavor. One can argue that maybe that was a safe space, although I'm not quite sure. I felt it was a little bit risky. But regardless, I see this quite often when you don't take the bait that leads you to those knee-jerk reactions that we have been trained to perform because we need to be able to defend our turf. If we're able to stop ourselves from taking the bait, that can be quite amazing to find out what kind of commonalities we actually have. Is the recognition of those commonalities, is that something that happens by nature, or is that something that we need to train ourselves on? I'm not quite sure what the answer is. Although a lot of it is tied to the ability to reflect on incidences that take place, maybe going back to the example that I mentioned pretty much in the beginning of this show, where one of the fears that we have, or better said, one of the fears that I have, I can't speak for you, but I can certainly speak for myself, of being in a situation where I don't like the way that I react. And it's all based upon that familiarity that I have with the situation and having an idea of what that reaction can be. Now, it would be a shame if indeed the only time that one feels the necessity to perform some sort of reflection is tied to this cataclysmic event. I would hope that that would be something that we can build into our routines. But the fact is, if we can understand things from somebody else's perspective, and of course, the prerequisite would be, of course, that we are able to treat them with respect. Then all of a sudden, we understand that maybe the words that they're using would not be the ones that you would use yourself. The way that the situation was phrased didn't describe the feelings, the feelings of the individual. But you are able to identify some sort of commonality in that of what is being said. And then we're off to the kinship races. There was a conversation that I was holding with a friend of mine per mail, and he was raising the point of apathy to be found within the vast majority of individuals, and it led me to the impression that he was not very hopeful of that change. I'm not quite sure whether he would set that same goal that I stated in the beginning, looking at justice as being the current state and not the future state. But I have the gut feeling he would be nodding his head in approval with that assessment. But what is the impetus of leading people towards apathy? Apathy is a condition that we reach, that we do not necessarily have as a driving force. In fact, it's almost the polar opposite. I would argue that that's a state that we reach that's based upon a number of situations that took place that maybe have led us to a condition where either we're lacking the energy, we're lacking the motivation, we're lacking the perspective, we're lacking the empowerment. Is this something that we can actually overcome? It's not something that is plug and play. It's something that requires a lot of work. It's something that can make us very frustrated. But do we have a choice? Let's think of our current condition, where we are continuously being bombarded by the authorities, quote unquote, to be, and the corresponding media that, in my mind, are almost on a mission to mentally bludgeon us into submission. That we stop ourselves from performing certain actions due to the fear that has been instilled in us as a mechanism to keep us quiet. And there is a reward and punishment aspect to this as well. The old carrot and stick. That they will not be used in equal measure. The stick is the preferred method, even if it does not appear to be so prominent. But the stick alone will not do the job. There has to be some carrot in there. Because it's the carrot that basically creates that impulse for us to come back for more. So again, going back out to the edges, to find those individuals that Greg talked about. Those individuals that are demonized within our society, those people that if apathy was the worst condition for them, they'd be doing pretty good. And to remind ourselves that based upon those two elements that we talk about quite often within the show, that being the dispositional and the situational, and the opinion that it's always a little bit of a combination of both, and we're always talking about being a little bit of a sinner and a little bit of a saint. And if we agree that these rules apply to all of us, then it makes the approach to get past the bluster, to get past the demonization, to get past our own hesitancy, and again, I'm talking about that hesitancy of maybe finding something out about yourself that you didn't really want to find out. Now, if we're able to get past those three things, then we see that path towards going past the future state and arriving at the current state, tied to justice. There was an article that I stumbled across this last week that acted as a trigger for me, getting me to think about different things and building up some sort of connection between different concepts. And it led me to this idea, which I'm going to call human utility. And just to make sure that we have clarity in these terms, when I use the word utility, I'm referring to something that is useful. In other words, if it's no longer useful for us, then we see no value, and there is a diminishing or a complete lack of utility. Human utility. That means we are talking about a condition of where a human being is useful. Or is no longer useful. And depending upon the usefulness of the human being in question, then we will have our corresponding reactions accordingly. If it's an object and it is no longer useful for us, what do we do with that object? It is the rare individual that I run across that tries to find another utility for that object. So if you can't use it for X, use it for Y. And figure out a way to extend the life cycle of that object. Now, am I too far-fetched to make this comparison of an object and a human being? When I look at what is taking place within my midst here in society, I do not feel that we are making any differentiation whatsoever between an object and a human being. As long as that human being is useful, then we give that individual attention. We reward that individual depending upon the utility to be found from that human being. And when indeed the utility has evaporated, then all of a sudden our question is, what do we do now? Because they are just a burden. A number of years ago, worked in a company and had a manager who, in my mind, was the epitome of resilience. Gentleman came from Northern Ireland and left at a very early age. Some would actually consider this person to be almost like a hobo. Certainly a journey person, performing different activities, living at different spots, trying to live life in the fullest. And based upon, this is my interpretation, I don't know what he would say, based upon all of those experiences that he had, it led him to a certain pronounced attitude that probably was there to begin with. But as we've seen with human beings, individuals, that the older they get, the more risk-averse they become. And this person was able to overcome it. Now, within the corporate world, that is not an easy endeavor, because, and here I'm speaking from personal experience, it's the easiest way to make enemies in saying that the emperor wears no clothes, or that we're ready to go off a cliff, or this is not right. But I saw this gentleman perform those actions a number of times. And he was a bit of a Houdini. He always figured out ways to actually end up, as we say in German, end up on the buttered side of the bread. And you would think that this would never end, but then something happened. And this gentleman had a stroke. And that was a number of years ago. And it certainly wasn't my own, the only confrontation I've had with the subject. But it was so overt that, and perhaps I was a little bit older already, that it really struck. Well, in any case, at the beginning they'd say, oh, yes, we'll wait until you get better. But I would argue that this concept of human utility showed its ugly face, where, and there, I already knew that he didn't always have friends, which should be looked upon as being a badge of honor. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes sure that you stick to your own standards. I watched how this individual became marginalized within the company. And it was a process where, I don't know, I think there were certain individuals who didn't want to throw him overboard right away. But eventually that's what it came to. And it took about a year, and eventually he was eased out of the company. And I'm extremely happy to say that the story has a happy end, because this individual, this epitome of resilience, the individual I'm talking about, was truly a phoenix. And in fact, he was not only able to grow a new pair of wings, but he figured other ways to shine. He was lucky. He was lucky that he was given the wherewithal from day one, I suspect. He was lucky to believe in himself and to trust his own instincts instead of the psychobabble that was going on to the right and left of him. And he was lucky to have the inner resilience to overcome that situation. But two things I like to concentrate on based on the story I just passed on to you. Very often in a situation like that, where you are confronted with some sort of health difficulties, and this is all tied to this article that I stumbled across, that apart from the question of utility that came through, it wasn't spelled out that way, but for me, the message was very clear. But that dispositional part came out loud and clear, that you're born this way and you have to suck it up. And within that dispositional, there is the deterministic, meaning that, yeah, you have some bad habits. You were born that way with those bad habits, and those bad habits led you to that health condition. Thinking that, well, certainly that could never happen to us because we do not have those bad habits. No, no, no. We have freed ourselves of bad habits, meaning we will stay free of all of those health complications. Now, if there isn't an internal hoodwink that I've run across, bigger than that one that I just spelled out to you right now, I don't know what it is. But this has everything to do with those people on the edges that maybe did not start at the edges, but migrated to the edge. Are you born on the edge? Some of us are. And I cannot answer this question because I was very fortunate and I'm not really even quite sure what it's really like to be at the edge. But I'm imagining that at least if you're born on the edge, you know how to deal with things. Whereas if you were in the middle, and then ended up migrating to the edge. And here I would like to underline, through no fault of your own, that maybe the challenge might even be bigger. And not everyone is born with the resiliency of that former boss of mine. Who could be looked upon as being a role model, but clearly not a standard, because that would mean that we would expect everyone to adhere to that standard. Now, that would be a wishful future state. But certainly would be an illusion. Deserving that fate and ending up on the edge. You know, for a number of years, the concept of depression was very often described with that type of phraseology. And we know how long homosexuality was thrown into that same bucket. And let's not even talk about skin color. Or the disabled. Or the refugees. And here within this concept of human utility, we have even taken it to the point where the elderly are put into that same category. So within this concept of the community of kinship, we need to be able to identify with those individuals who are to be found on those edges. And understand that for a number of those people, we are talking about a story that not only we don't know it, but I believe that the story is something that we could never even dream up in our own heads. So when we talk about human utility, we're talking about a shelf life. And through the lack of patience, through the striving towards convenience, through the inability to put all this on hold and take a step back and reflect as to what's actually taking place around us, to what degree we are happy. Happy might not necessarily be the right word, or content. Let's use the word content. That we're content with our own reaction, the ability to put it out there. And here I'm referring to the ability to be vulnerable, taking a risk, and perhaps not necessarily always being ready for your own reaction to whatever that situation may be, and to be able to get past the shock and the ability to come to terms with your own reaction, and the ability to turn that one around and use it as a force for good.